and Excel, in fact. But we'll also look at some other sort of working with school performance tables and doing some analysis there. Why is this whole big data thing so important now? Because of the vast amount of data that we are now storing about pretty much everything we do. Think of the number of photographs you've taken in the last week. Think of the number of videos that your pupils might have recorded in the last week. This is a consequence of a thing called Kreider's law, which is similar to the sort of much more famous Moore's law. Moore's law says that the processing power of any particular bit of silicon doubles every 18 months to 2 years or so. Kreider's law says the storage capacity doubles every 12 to 18 months or so. One consequence of this is that the amount of data we have stored as a civilization in the last 18 months or so is pretty much the same as the amount which we stored in history up until that point. It doubles the amount that we store over that sort of period. Why is this? Because of the scale of the technology. Now, once upon a time, something like Wikipedia would take all of those library stacks, 12 big library stacks, to store that amount of information, the amount of text in the English Wikipedia. These days, you can fit that amount of information onto the micro SD card, which is about the same size as your fingernail, with room for another 9 copies of Wikipedia alongside it. It's astonishing, the amount of capacity in even a small little bit of storage space such as that. And we're using it. We really are using almost all of this storage capacity. Eric Schmidt talking in 2010, every 2 days now we create as much information as we did from the dawn of civilization up until 2003. The real issue from his point of view is user-generated content. All of those YouTube videos, all of those photographs being posted onto Facebook or wherever. And now we move into virtual reality and 3D and all of that, and we just keep increasing the ways that we're using all of this storage space. What happens in an internet minute? All of that, you've seen similar statistics, I'm sure, before. 38,000 photographs being posted to Instagram, 347,000 new tweets, 2.4 million new search queries. Each of these things, even when it's just a search query, generates data. And of course, Google do not forget those search queries. These are stored pretty much for as long as we're likely to ever want them. I remember once upon a time, we had the view of cyberspace as the place where we could go to be whoever we wanted to be, to reinvent ourselves, because we were entirely anonymous behind the machine on the internet. Nobody knows you're a dog. Of course, now, with the data trail that we leave, and with the way that companies and other organizations use that data trail, this is no longer the case. It's the internet. Of course they know you're a dog. They also know your favorite chew toy, pet food, how many times a day you go for a walk, and the name of the poodle at the park who you keep sending roses to. Yeah? Are your students aware of all of the data trail that they leave? We teach them in Key Stage 1 of the national curriculum to keep their personal information private. What does that really mean now? Isn't your Google search history personal information? Private from whom? Private from Google? Private from your network manager? Private from your internet service provider? How can you keep this sort of information private? When you go to Google, when you type something in, you of course leave a trail behind, teaching children to think about that. And of course, companies are using this information. If your search queries will determine what adverts are placed on Google's results. Your Amazon purchases and your Amazon searches will determine what Amazon show you in terms of adverts, but they'll also determine what Facebook show you in terms of adverts. This information is routinely shared, and people are making, or companies are making, decisions on the basis of this. How's your insurance premium set? How's your credit limit set? How all of these decisions are made, how are the supermarkets deciding which offers to give you, is on the basis of the information that they have about you, the deductions that they make from this. The story in the New York Times magazine of the supermarket who knew that the man's daughter was pregnant before he did because her buying habits had changed. And how companies make use of that. Are we using this sort of information in school? I don't know as we are. What I'd like you to do for the next couple of minutes, probably no more than that, is talk to the people who are sat with you about the data that you as a school are routinely storing. Don't just think of the obvious ones. Don't just think about your marks on pupils' attendance data. There's other data that you as an institution, you as an organisation are routinely collecting. Try and be imaginative. What are your examples? So, our friends at Ofsted, let's hear it for Ofsted. Thank you very much, Dan. Okay, are really interested in data. They're only interested in the summary statistics. We're not yet at the point where Ofsted are demanding access to all of the examples of data as to what the child ate or which websites the child has visited. But you never know. You know, that sort of synoptic view of what's happening in a school. I hope not for the inspectorate, in all honesty. But, yes, obviously Ofsted's judgment is very much determined by those overall big performance level indicators or performance indicators that you don't get graded as outstanding by Ofsted unless your data says that you're outstanding. It's very, very hard to find examples of schools that do well at Ofsted that do not have data which supports that judgment. Our friends at Ofsted, of course, routinely using Raise Online to get that overview of the school's performance, and that data being something that's available to your head teacher, to your chair of governors, and thus to you yourselves, one would hope. And the sort of data which is available in Raise Online, so how well are children doing in the school compared to the national cohort? Well, in this particular anonymised school, 308 points nationally, but 325 points at the school Key Stage 4 capped point score. So that's significantly better. And of course, the Ofsted inspector sees that and is thus disposed to find that the school is doing a good job when they see that data. Notice, though, how both in the Ofsted inspection requirements and in Raise Online, it goes into the detail of your groups of pupils. And doing that analysis with the sort of markbook, gradebook information you have from Firefly is something which I think it would be well worth looking at, making sure that the children in these vulnerable categories of your free school meal pupils, if you have them in your school, the children who are looked after, the children with low prior attainment, are they performing in line with national expectations as well as the cohort as a whole? And if not, what would one do to intervene? Stephen Heppel, writing the introductory work for the ETAG group, saying that it's no longer about who owns the data. I think he's wrong in that. I think that's a really important question. But how could we create demand for ownership amongst students for ownership of their learning data, that they should care about these things. They should be interested in that sort of synoptic view of what the school knows about them, how they're performing. The Fitbit is the lovely example here of folks wearing these things because they care about their fitness and because having that detailed information is something which they personally feel is important to them. And can we get to the point where educational data is seen as positively as that by pupils themselves as well as by those in authority? This is what I mentioned in the panel there about the children are the data subjects, that their parents in local authority schools have an independent right of access to their educational record, but there is no parallel right in independent schools and in academies and in free schools. You yourselves as a school need to determine what access to a child's data you would give to that child's parents. The story is a rather different one when it comes to the government deciding what to do with children's data. So a certain amount of data has to be reported by your school, including information at pupil level about how well children are doing. What exam results did they get? How did they do in the Key Stage 2 SATs? Could they dress themselves independently at the age of 5? That information goes on, is reported to central government, and central government include that in the National Pupil Database, which is a monumental collection of very detailed, individual level data about how children are doing in schools. It doesn't collect absolutely everything. It won't show what their lunches were yesterday. But there's a surprisingly large amount of information in that data. Nobody has the right to opt out of that, apart from homeschooling, I guess. If you go to a school, then your school has to submit this information. There was no process of consent obtained. This was done through government regulation. And now government has decided that that information is something which they will make available to researchers, including those working for commercial organisations, so as to make education better. You know, this is, I'm fairly convinced, out of a sort of benign interest in improving the system. But it's something which we ought to be aware of and which we ought to discuss. The The evidence-informed education agenda is an important one, and the data feeds into that as well. How do we know that an intervention has worked? Because the data says that it did. Children were doing this well up to that point. We introduced the iPads, and then they did that well afterwards. Was there a significant improvement at that point when we did the intervention? If we do this with a sufficiently large collection of children, we can make some deductions about that. Education Endowment Foundation up at Durham have a really good toolkit for analysing this, for doing this sort of intervention project and checking whether this works at the level of you as a teacher in an individual school. I was doing this myself back in 2006. We were one of the first primary schools in the country to introduce a virtual learning environment. We set daily maths homework, and then we started doing this online. So we put all of this into a virtual learning environment. The children logged in, the children did the homework, children logged out again. Did it make a difference? Well, I looked at how well they did in the previous year and how well they did in the year when we introduced this. And surprisingly enough, children who scored well in the Key Stage 5, the Year 5 QCA optional tests, it's a while ago now, did very well in the Year 6 SATs. That doesn't come as a surprise. What was interesting is that the year we introduced the virtual learning environment, the trend line itself went up. So there was a differential performance that they did on the whole a couple of points in terms of standardized scores better once we'd introduced the virtual learning environment than before that point. Not, regrettably, a statistically significant result, but there you go. What was interesting was looking into the log files, that some children, once we introduced this, did significantly better than they would have been expected to do without this or before this. And that's interesting. What were these ones who are way above the line doing differently from those who were actually below the line after we introduced the virtual learning environment? And the things that came up as statistically significant was that they were sort of stepping back from the daily homework and using it in a more strategic way. Those who looked back at old homeworks, those who looked back at old lesson smart notebook files as we were using then, were the ones where this made the most difference, irrespective of where they were across the ability or prior attainment range. Do we yet have the sat-nav for education, the thing that knows where the child is and can suggest to that child the next best thing to do, the best way to get to the destination which you have chosen for them, or better still, which they have chosen for themselves? Do we yet have the Fitbit for education, the detailed profile of what your achievement is? And I think the sort of pupil dashboard view in Firefly gets us close to this, but isn't really addressing the sort of sat-nav of this is the next thing to do. The adaptive learning design has been around for a while now, but there's only recently that we're starting to see inroads in this. One of my students yesterday morning, she's doing a little third-year dissertation project on do iPads help with teaching of phonics? And so we had her seminar yesterday. She was presenting on her work so far, and she put this slide up. What does the computer need to provide in order to support phonics education? Present information and activities to students, assess students' work, respond to students' work, and provide scaffolds such as access to word pronunciations and definitions that help students read successfully. And that gave me real pause for thought, because what Catherine had kind of described on that slide was pretty much most of the job description for a teacher. Yeah? What does the teacher need to do? Provide information and activities to students, assess students' work, respond to students' work, we do that a lot, and provide some sort of scaffolding. So I say, Catherine, are you trying to replace the teacher with the computer? And that's where it almost suggests it going. I don't think we are. I think there are things we uniquely do that the machines can't do, even with rapid advances in AI, as Jim was talking about this morning. And part of that's a motivation thing, and part of that's a teaching them to be a person thing. It's the humanity, it's the civilization, it's the character that the machines aren't particularly good at developing, although they can be jolly useful for teaching phonics. The thing here about assessing students' work, of course, the machines are very, very good at that, and it's nice to see Firefly being used as an augmentation to that rather than a replacement of teachers' marking. But replacing teachers' marking is not a bad thing to do with this technology. You know, my online homework back in 2006, the machine was marking that. I spent time creating the homework, but I didn't have to spend time marking the homework. And once you do the homework, once you answer the questions On the machine, you can bring a whole host of statistical techniques straight away to the problem of what does this score mean. So we have an example from Diagnostic Questions platform here, which we're using for a thing called Project Quantum, which is about assessing computing. So you ask the class, the children, the question, which number of this list is biggest? And I hope everybody has the right answer here. But it won't, I hope, surprise any maths teachers in the room to know that a lot of students pick 0.503. As the biggest number on this list, yeah? Because 503 is clearly bigger than 51. What is interesting, and what the data tells you, is that actually it's the weaker students who pick that answer and the stronger students who pick the correct answer there. And there's this thing called rationalysis, which gets into the detail of this, that given their performance across a range of questions on the topic, which are the good discriminatory questions, which a student who knows it will get right, and a student who doesn't know it will get wrong, which they won't just guess the wrong answer for. And that's a really interesting territory in terms of developing good quality multiple choice questions. Multiple choice questions only get you so far. We're now at the point where the machines can mark essays. Saying which of these answers between 4 is correct is an easy thing for the machine to do. For the machine to mark an essay, that's really moving into territory which was really our preserve as teachers. But Australia is piloting this thing for the equivalent of the SATs there, of getting children's work read by the machine and marked by the machine. The grade is assigned not by the teacher, but by the machine itself. The way you do it is you get the good quality teachers to mark 1,000 of these scripts. The machine looks at the mark, the machine looks at the scripts and says, okay, these characteristics in the script produce this result in the marks, and applies that rule then to the other tens of thousands of essays that otherwise would have to be read and marked by teachers. Would you want that in your school? Would you want that in GCSEs or A-levels? Save an awful lot of time. And if it's more accurate than teachers, what's not to like about that? It's coming. Whether you want it or not is another matter. The predictive analytics stuff has also been around for a while. How do you determine the child's target grade? Are you relying on external agencies to do that? How much information are you taking in account when setting, this student should get this score at the age of 16 plus, at the age of 18 plus? How is that judgment made? How much information do you take into account? You probably take into account their score on entry to the school. Key Stage 2 SAT scores is a good predictor of GCSE outcomes. You might give them sort of cognitive, verbal, non-verbal reasoning tests. But what about the lunch that they have? What about the websites that they visit? Is that data which also ought to feed into that prediction of how well you will do in 16 plus or 18 plus exams? Or should we make a distinction between that? In terms of the GPS stuff, Ruth Kelly, who was then Secretary of State for Education back in 2005, was really optimistic about the whole learning platform rollout. She thought that it would be a digital space, personalised, remembers what the learner is interested in, suggests websites, alerts them to courses and learning opportunities that fit their need. That sort of adaptive, this would be the right thing for you to do next. I don't think we're seeing much of that yet, but we're getting there. Organisations such as Pearson and Newton are getting to the point where if all that the learner does is using their tools in their online space, then you can start doing the Amazon recommends, the Netflix suggests, the eBay picks type algorithm type approach to this. You've done very well on these questions, but this area is something you're finding difficult. This would be the right thing for you to do next, which is what we as teachers have done for a long time. But in other areas of life, the machines are getting very, very good at that. Spotify, what is it? Weekly discovery on Spotify, yeah? It's better than most DJs at picking music, but sure, it's better than I am at picking music that I'm going to enjoy listening to it, because it knows more music than I do. What's the Spotify discovery for education? Can we as teachers do that? Are we as good at that at the moment? Perhaps. Okay, on then into the sort of analysis bit here. Back in do this yourself. There are products there. You can get the dashboard view. You can have the thing which says, yes, if a learner is doing this sort of thing, then the learner should do that sort of thing. These products exist already, but it's really good fun to master at least some of these techniques yourself and to take charge of this as an organisation, as a school. And back in 2005, they saw that the schools that were doing the best things using data then were the ones that were mucking around in Excel spreadsheets and learning the tools for themselves rather than buying the product which did this all for you. So you can take text, you can take a student's essay, you can take a report about a student and pour it into Wordle and see what what comes up there. We do this with our students' blog posts at Roehampton. So this is a whole year. There's 1 million words in the corpus of text here. And what is it our students write about? They write about children and they write about thinking, and I think that's exactly how it should be. Try doing this with reports. Try doing this with the feedback you get by looking through a whole column when it comes to Firefly usage. Have a look at the social networks. Yeah, I respect the privacy thing, but who comments on whose work? Who comments on whose blog post is an interesting social network? Who's friends with who is really interesting data in terms of educational outcomes. So we did this with a PGCE group back at Roehampton. This student, life and soul of the class here, says this one, reading other people's posts, commenting on other people's posts, responding to comments on their own post. Student 89 here, we give them numbers, it's so much easier than remembering their name, is the one that I worry about. Student 89 only commented on one blog post over the course of the year, and nobody commented on his or her blog during the course of the year. I should have known about that. I should have spotted that earlier on and intervened. I want the machine to say to me, Miles, you need to pay attention to this. Look what's happening here. The machine is better at spotting those sorts of things than I am. But on this occasion, because I didn't bother to run the code, do the surveys, do the opinion polls, and look at how their answers to one question determine or are related to their answer to other questions. At the first lecture they have at Roehampton, we ask, how good are you at loads of things? How good are they at programming? How good are they at using email? They're pretty good at using email. They're pretty bad at programming, surprisingly enough. We then look at how these things relate to how they say they go about learning new stuff on a computer. So I prefer to figure things out for myself, or I prefer to work with someone who can explain things. Those who prefer to work things out for themselves score significantly higher on skills, knowledge, and understanding than those who prefer to have somebody explain things to them. I don't think it comes as a surprise. Which way does causality go?
Well, partly that, but also what size of sample you take. Say it's significant data.
Yeah.
If you do that in a subject-based school, then it's not really significant.
I think, well, okay, I mean, the significance has a technical term here, and I may not have used it without actually checking what the particular significance value is, but I'm fairly certain this is, I forget whether this is my, 1,500 students who've done the survey or just the last 200 to do it. I think if this is 1,500 students, then that is a significant finding. Even with 200 students in just one cohort, I think that would be a significant difference, given the variation in one of these means. But yeah, you're right to check on that, and it's a good question to ask. But yeah, I'm fair. I remember doing the analysis, and I think I was using the term correctly, but yeah, good call. Okay, what about things you can do with Firefly? So you've got all of that markbook data there. I'm not using Firefly at Roehampton. We don't get sort of choice over these sorts of things. What I've got, though, is a sort of dummy instance of Firefly here. Here I'm logged in as Terry Teacher, of course. So we can see what Laura's grades are across the course of the term. Oh my goodness, she's predicted an A, and look, only 29% on the first one there. And I love the colour coding here. You get a sort of overview of the picture there. That seemed to be a reasonably easy assignment there. You have now, though, the ability to export this as an Excel worksheet and bring this into Excel to do some further analysis there. So this is the markbook. Here's what you get when you bring it into Excel. So lots and lots of sort of spaces in there, and it's kind of harder to see it now that it's in Excel than ever it was when we were looking at it on screen there. We can clean this up a bit, so this is just at the top, sort of tidying it up, replacing some of the space A with A as a grade, because space A is different when it gets into Excel. It's much more helpful, though, to work in a long form of data than a big wide form of data here. So the bottom of this worksheet is just putting this into sort of long form, which you see stacked on the next page here. Let's take the filter off. And there you get all of the students, all of their work, all of their grades, and all of the feedback in one single spreadsheet. We can look at one individual student, which is fine. So here's Emma's work. She's predicted a C. How's she doing? She's getting a B on most of these assignments. Some of these are pretty good scores by the looks of things, so I'd say that's a pretty good set of results there. It's interesting, though, when you look at the feedback, that a lot of this seems really quite formulaic. You should be pleased with this homework. You should be pleased with this homework. There are some good answers here. 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 If I was Emma, I think I might just get, just tell me the grade, really. I can work out the rest of the feedback from myself from that. We can look at other things on here. Once you have it in this format, you're not limited to just looking at a particular assignment or a particular student. You can start looking at a particular set of marks. So let's have a look at the best that we've got here. So 98s, 97s, 94s. What have we? Oh my gosh, we've got a couple of students who have predicted a B. Paula here really went to town with this assignment. She got 98 on that. 98 is a really high score. I think this is an English assignment as well. What does she have to do? Revise for the end of topic text next week. Don't know quite what was going on there. Excellent. I like the way you discuss the different examples. I'm not quite sure how much feedback relates to that particular task, but I'll let you form your own judgment on that. Who here has used Excel pivot tables? Pivot tables are cool. Pivot tables lets you do they're not cool? Okay, for very small values of cool. Okay, pivot tables lets you do a lot of the sort of automating this sort of analysis, seeing this, getting Excel to do the summarizing for you. So let's see what we can do here. Let's take this first by target grade and sort that out into rows. Then let's have a look at the students within each of those target grade groups. Let's see how many tasks they had. I think they should all have 16 of those. But then let's have a look at the grade that they got on each of those tasks. So there you have it, a reasonably easy way to understand. These are your predicted an A grade students. How well are they doing? Well, Emma seems to be pretty much on track for a grade A. I'd worry a little about Nicholas. That 11 and all of them graded at B seems a little bit disappointing. What's going on here, though? Jonathan, there's worse than Jonathan. Joseph Goulden here, 8 with a D. We can click on that and bring up that complete list there. Again, how specific, how helpful is this sort of feedback? He doesn't seem to be paying a huge amount of attention to the feedback he's being given here. Should you as a teacher notice these things? I would hope so. Should you as a head of department or a deputy head brackets academic take an interest in this sort of thing? I'd say so. I think this is something where we might sort of want to say, well, look, Joseph is supposed to be getting an A. He's doing really badly at the moment, and could we possibly be more helpful with our feedback here? This requires a certain degree of human interpretation as well as the machine drawing your attention to this sort of thing. And then there's weird stuff going on here. So I reckon those who are predicted a B are actually doing reasonably well here. So there's some sort of difference between the prediction and the outcomes here. You also have in Firefly the ability to export the list of tasks. This is the complete set of every task that has been set in a school that has very kindly provided us with anonymized data here. So here we have the sort of Manhattan plot of what goes on from the beginning when Firefly was first introduced on the 30th of June 2014 to pretty much up to a reasonably recent date. You see immediately there are big gaps pretty much every year. What's going on there, folks? Okay, you guys not working July and August? There are gaps. There are also gaps, 5 gaps during the course of the year, which obviously are half-term and holidays. There's a lot of enthusiasm for Firefly when it's first introduced. People are, perhaps there's the staff meeting, everybody go and create your Firefly assignment. That was a really busy day for Firefly in this school. But somehow over the course of the year, that sort of, we're going to set things online, we're going to use Firefly for, okay, GCSE, A-level classes may well have gone home by this point, so some drop-off in that summer term perhaps is expected. But, are we really interested in setting and marking homework online in those last 2 weeks? So those 2 weeks in July, I wonder about that. That does seem to be a pattern which repeats itself in the subsequent year as well. We can drill down into the detail here, so we can pick a teacher at random, a small town in Southern Ireland. That's 2 teachers at random. Okay, so what's going on here? We've got that sort of initial enthusiasm thing. We've got large gaps when not so much seems to be getting done here. So, you know, there could be particular circumstances, but you can see that as an overview as to what's happening. One homework. Okay, we don't know the names, we don't know the details here. We can't make too many assumptions from this. We can get into the detail, of course. Let's try and find somebody slightly more interesting. There's one. Okay, so this is Cameron Arbor. I assume all of these are anonymized names there. So we've got, some nice, let's move this out of the way so you can see what's going on here. Here's the list of the ones that Cameron is setting. So let's have a look at this 6, pull up that data, and we've got, I'm not quite sure what DR1 is going to be at this point, but we can get into the task that's set. Let's see that in a little more detail. Here's the PowerPoint. Oh, it's drama, isn't it? The rehearsal techniques you've been doing with me. So all on one day, all of these homeworks being set. We can, of course, because there's an Excel, work out how long a teacher sets for homeworks, and you can look at that subject by subject if you want. Play with it. Have a look at, download that task report, bring it into Excel, and start seeing what that data tells you about what's happening with the tasks being set in your school. The last thing I was going to do was to walk you through some other statistical analysis. So this is using a high-end statistical package called R. Any R users in the room? Okay, that's great. Okay, so R is text-based, so you've got to type commands into R to get it to do analysis. But the analysis it does is pretty phenomenal. And trying to do this in Excel is painful, believe me on this. If you want to do this sort of serious statistical analysis, then don't keep using Excel for this. Make the move. The learning curve is a relatively steep one, but it is worth pursuing that. So I am loading a couple of libraries. I am reading in the Key Stage 4 performance data from, okay, I think I'm reading it in. Yes, I read in the Key Stage 4 performance data from 2014 to 2015. So we have here 5,358 observations, in other words, schools, 552 variables. That's the number of things which the government publish in those performance data tables. We're going to do a certain amount of data cleaning here. I'm going to get rid of anything that isn't a mainstream school. I'm going to treat things as numerical values, stripping out awkward percentage signs, which the DFE include in the data. There, I am going to deal with school type. Okay, how's this for complicated? So you have all of these different school types: academies, county schools, voluntary aided, voluntary controlled, foundation schools, city technology colleges, don't know what, CYS, county special schools. And you've got all of these different school types. Trying to do any analysis when you've got that sort of disparate group of data is unpleasant. So we're going to clean this up, and we're going to say there are essentially 3 types of school: academies, local authority schools, and special schools. There are independent schools as well. I'm actually going to remove the independent schools from the data here because they don't generally submit Key Stage 2 performance results, so I can't compare Key Stage 2 with Key Stage 4. What have we got going on now? Let's plot some data. So here, Qplot. Data is this Key Stage 4 mainstream school. Total average point score, capped point score in groups of 10, and we get a histogram. Doing a histogram in Excel is on its own an unpleasant activity, but in R we get that pretty much straight away there. We can have a look at that coloured in according to the type of school. We can do that one side against the other. So academies, local authority schools, looks as though academies are doing slightly better there. We can do the box plot thing. It's hard to tell, but notice the big spread with academies. Some academies doing really badly, some doing very, very well. On the whole, it looks as though they're slightly better than the local authority schools. We can fit a model here, and this is where R comes into its own. So these 2 lines of code here say, is the Key Stage 4 results, the total capped point score, determined by the type of school that the school is? And it turns out that, yeah, broadly speaking, it is determined to some extent by the type of school. Local authority schools, on average, 5.6 points lower Key Stage 4 than academies are scoring. What would explain that? Is it down to the Key Stage 2 scores that they get when they go to the school? It looks to me as though academies seem to have slightly pupils who score slightly better at Key Stage 2 than local authority schools do. And surprisingly enough, you find that schools where the average Key Stage 2 point score is high have a very high average Key Stage 4 point score. Schools that accept high ability pupils or high achieving pupils produce high achieving pupils 5 years later on. Surprise, surprise. Isn't that data interesting? Okay, so do you notice something about this, though? Do you notice how you've almost got two groups of dots here? You've got like the big blob in the middle here, and then you've got another sort of collection of dots up at the top right of the screen. Anybody figured out what's going on there? Okay, let me colour that in. The blue dots here are selective schools. The orange dots here are comprehensives. The few green dots are the few remaining secondary moderns. The top right of the graph here is made up of grammar schools. They accept high-achieving pupils, and they produce high-achieving pupils as an outcome there. That shouldn't come as a surprise. So can we say that the outcome of a school is determined by its admissions policy, how well they do? And yes, of course it is. Generally, selective schools scoring 101 points higher than non-selective schools are doing. You would expect that because we know already that those Key Stage 2 results are a good determinant of Key Stage 4 outcomes. What if we factor that in, though? What if we fit a linear model, as I'm doing on this line, which says that the average capped point score on output is determined by the admission policy of the school plus the Key Stage 2 SATs results? What happens if we have a look at that data? And you find in the summary table here, the significant thing is the Key Stage 2 average point score. The admission policy of the school is no longer a statistically significant result. Children who do well at Key Stage 2 SATs will generally do well at Key Stage 4, irrespective of whether they go to a selective or non-selective school. And this is from the DFE's own data. Are they paying attention to this? I'll leave that for you to judge. We're already past quarter to 4, when I was supposed to stop this afternoon because you've got to go and get some tea before the next thing. But does anybody want to ask any questions or make any comments whilst we're together? Maybe that's your question. No. Talk more afterwards. The previous group said, Miles, this is interesting. How do we learn? Well, some of them said that. How do we learn more about R? The slides are all online, folks, but there are a couple of really good MOOCs. Introducing R for Data Science, which is produced by Microsoft. Very, very straightforward, easy MOOC, I would say. Really nice step-by-step introduction to the basics. And then R programming from Johns Hopkins University in Washington, which takes you to the next level with that. Both of those are free, both of those are online. There's a community website called R Bloggers, I don't know how they came up with the name there, where people sort of share stories and cool data analysis that they did with R. These slides are online if you ever want to see them again. So bit.ly/fireflylc will take you to the slide deck, and most of the slides have links to the original supporting material. One more question?